There's a specific type of fat hiding in your body right now that doesn't behave like the fat you can pinch or see in the mirror. While most people imagine body fat as a single uniform layer sitting just beneath the skin, there's another player in this game that operates completely differently, and it's been quietly sabotaging your metabolic health without you even knowing it. This isn't the soft, visible fat that bothers you when you look down. This is visceral fat, and it lives deep inside your abdominal cavity, wrapping itself around your liver, intestines, and other vital organs in a space where metabolic activity runs far hotter and more dangerously than anywhere else in your body. What makes visceral fat so different from the fat you can see is not just its location, but the way it behaves. Scientists don't describe visceral fat as inflammatory to be dramatic or to scare you. They use that term because this fat constantly releases chemical signals, cytokines, and hormones that fundamentally alter how your entire body handles energy, processes sugar, and stores additional fat. It's biologically active in ways that surface fat simply isn't. Think of subcutaneous fat as relatively quiet storage, while visceral fat is like a metabolic alarm system that never stops broadcasting distress signals throughout your system. But here's what truly sets visceral fat apart and makes it especially tricky to eliminate. The way it communicates with your liver creates a vicious cycle that most people never break. Since visceral fat sits so close to your internal organs, it drains directly into something called the portal vein, the major blood vessel that carries nutrients straight to your liver. This means that every time visceral fat releases fatty acids, they hit your liver first, flooding it with fuel at moments when your body doesn't actually need it. Your liver, overwhelmed by this constant influx, starts becoming resistant to insulin signals. This disrupts normal blood sugar regulation and paradoxically encourages even more fat storage, especially in the abdominal area. It's a metabolic loop that quietly grows your belly from the inside out, and most people never realize they're trapped in it until their waistline has expanded significantly or their blood work starts showing problems. Now here's the part that surprises almost everyone who learns about visceral fat. Despite being more stubborn and metabolically dangerous than subcutaneous fat, visceral fat actually reacts faster to the right kind of training. It's more sensitive to improvements in mitochondrial efficiency, changes in insulin signaling, and especially to lower intensity aerobic stimulation. That's precisely why Zone 2 walking keeps appearing in research study after research study on deep belly fat loss. The hidden, stubborn fat that's been causing metabolic chaos is also the fat most willing to burn once you understand how to trigger its specific weak spots. You're about to discover exactly where those weak spots are and how to exploit them consistently. Before we dive deeper into the science, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing this community grow around the world, and it helps me understand who I'm creating this content for. Zone 2 isn't what most people picture when they think of effective exercise. It's not the sweat-dripping, heart-pounding, gasping for air kind of workout that fitness culture has convinced us we need. It's actually the opposite. It's an easy, conversational pace that honestly feels almost too light to matter, especially when you're used to pushing yourself hard. But while the external experience feels gentle, inside your body, especially within the tiny cellular powerhouses called mitochondria, this zone represents a metabolic golden hour. Researchers studying energy metabolism call it the sweet spot range, where your cells learn to burn fat more efficiently without being pushed into the kind of emergency mode that triggers stress hormones and carbohydrate dependence. The fundamental key to understanding Zone 2 is recognizing what fuel source your body prioritizes at this intensity. When you move at this steady, controlled pace, you're training your mitochondria to oxidize fatty acids, including visceral fat specifically, at a progressively higher rate. Think of it as teaching your body to prefer fat as its default energy currency during activity, rather than always reaching for quick-burning carbohydrates.
Over time, this metabolic preference doesn't just apply during your walks, it begins influencing how your body handles fuel around the clock, even when you're sitting at your desk or sleeping at night. Another aspect of Zone 2 that people consistently overlook is its profound effect on something called metabolic flexibility. This is your body's ability to smoothly switch gears between burning carbohydrates and burning fat, depending on what's available and what the situation demands. When you're metabolically flexible, your body doesn't panic when carbohydrate intake drops. It doesn't desperately cling to fat stores for protection. Instead, it shifts gears and begins mobilizing stored fat for energy. Metabolic flexibility is directly and strongly linked to lower visceral fat accumulation and significantly better long-term health outcomes across virtually every health marker researchers track. Now, here's the kicker that frustrates people once they understand it. Many individuals walk every single day, sometimes for 30 minutes or more, but they never actually hit this metabolic sweet spot because their pace falls either too slow to create adaptation or too fast, pushing them out of the fat-burning zone entirely. You're about to learn exactly how to identify the right pace using nothing but your own body's signals, no gadgets, heart rate monitors, or expensive equipment needed. Here's the simplest, most liberating truth about finding your Zone 2 intensity. You absolutely do not need a laboratory test, a sports watch, or any technology whatsoever. Researchers who study exercise physiology consistently report that Zone 2 lines up remarkably well with what they call a comfortable but purposeful effort. You should be able to hold a conversation with someone walking beside you, speaking in full sentences without gasping, but you definitely shouldn't be able to sing comfortably. Your breathing should be noticeably deeper than at rest, perhaps coming through your mouth occasionally, but you shouldn't feel like you're constantly chasing your breath or struggling to keep up with oxygen demand.
One of the most practical cues that scientists recommend, particularly for people doing this without technology, is the nasal breathing test. If you can maintain breathing only through your nose for several minutes but feel slightly challenged while doing so, you're almost certainly in Zone 2. It's a surprisingly reliable indicator because nasal airflow naturally changes right around the specific intensity where your body begins leaning more heavily on fat oxidation than carbohydrate burning. When you cross into Zone 3, which is too intense for optimal fat burning, maintaining nose breathing becomes genuinely difficult or impossible. Your body demands more oxygen faster than your nose can deliver it. Another physical cue to watch for is what I call the slight warmth sensation. Your body temperature rises and you feel noticeably warmer than when you started, but you're nowhere near the point of sweating through your shirt or feeling overheated. This aligns perfectly with the physiological point where lactate levels in your muscles remain low and stable, which is a hallmark signature of true Zone 2 training. Once lactate starts accumulating, you've crossed into higher intensity work that shifts your fuel usage away from fat. Before we explore what's happening inside your cells during these walks, answer something in the comments. What's genuinely the hardest part for you? Finding the right pace initially, or staying consistent with it week after week? Your answer doesn't just help me create better content, it helps other viewers realize they're not alone in their struggles, and it boosts the discussion around the science we're exploring together. If you could somehow zoom into your muscle tissue during a proper Zone 2 walk, you'd witness a quiet but profound transformation taking place at the cellular level. Your mitochondria, those tiny structures that exist in nearly every cell and are responsible for creating the energy molecule ATP, begin working at exactly the pace they're designed for. They're not overloaded by intensity that creates excessive metabolic waste, and they're not starved by the kind of inactivity that lets them atrophy. This steady, consistent input teaches them to multiply and become dramatically more efficient at their job. One of the most important outcomes happening inside your cells is something researchers call fatty acid oxidation. At Zone 2 intensity, your mitochondria demonstrate a clear preference for fat molecules as their primary fuel choice. The more often you train at this specific intensity, the better your mitochondria become at burning fat, not just during activity, but also at rest and during everyday movements. Multiple studies consistently show a measurable increase in the total number of mitochondria after repeated Zone 2 sessions over several weeks. This mitochondrial upgrade matters enormously for visceral fat because that deeper abdominal fat is especially responsive to improvements in metabolic efficiency. As your cells progressively get better at handling fat as fuel, they pull more and more fatty acids from your bloodstream circulation, and visceral fat begins shrinking from the inside out. The process isn't dramatic in the moment. You won't feel fat melting away during a single walk, but its effects compound exponentially over weeks and months. Think of Zone 2 training as investing in a complete metabolic makeover rather than chasing quick, dramatic, sweaty wins that disappear just as fast as they appeared. Your body doesn't immediately tap into visceral fat reserves the moment you start walking. Understanding this timeline helps manage expectations and prevents people from giving up prematurely. At the very beginning of any exercise session, most of your energy comes from stored carbohydrates, specifically muscle glycogen and circulating blood glucose. But as your walk continues and your intensity stays carefully inside the Zone 2 range, your metabolism begins shifting toward fat utilization, a transition that's heavily influenced by oxygen availability and mitochondrial readiness. Scientific studies examining substrate utilization during exercise show that the body begins mobilizing significantly more visceral fat when low-intensity exercise stays consistent for long enough that carbohydrate demand naturally decreases. This metabolic shift can take anywhere from several minutes to 15 or 20 minutes, and the exact timing varies considerably from person to person, depending on current fitness level, insulin sensitivity, recent food intake, and training history. Once your body reaches this fat preference point, visceral fat becomes a surprisingly accessible fuel source. Because of its unique location near the liver and its direct connection to the portal vein, the body can break it down and redistribute it efficiently when metabolic conditions strongly favor fat oxidation, which Zone 2 specifically encourages. And here's an encouraging detail that makes consistency so rewarding. The more regularly you practice Zone 2 walking, the faster your body reaches this fat-burning transition point. Your metabolic system remembers, adapts, and becomes increasingly efficient over time. Someone who's been doing Zone 2 consistently for 3 months will shift into fat-burning mode much faster than someone attempting their first week. The adaptation is real and measurable. One of the most persistent misconceptions floating around fitness communities is that Zone 2 walking must last an hour or longer to produce any meaningful benefit. In reality, research shows measurable positive shifts in abdominal fat with shorts as 30 minutes, as long as the intensity stays steady within the target zone. The absolute key is consistency over time, not heroic single efforts that leave you exhausted. The earliest improvements you'll experience don't come from visible changes in your waist measurement or mirror reflection. They come from internal metabolic shifts that are happening beneath the surface. Studies specifically examining low-intensity aerobic exercise show significant reductions in liver fat, meaningful improvements in insulin sensitivity, and increased concentrations of mitochondrial enzymes after just a few weeks of consistent training. These are the quiet foundational changes that pave the way for visceral fat to eventually shrink noticeably. Most people begin noticing a tangible difference in how their clothes fit and how their midsection feels around the 6-week mark, although the metabolic improvements that drive those changes start much earlier. This is precisely why experienced researchers and coaches emphasize patience so strongly. Visceral fat responds to steady, repeated metabolic signals, not sporadic intensity spikes. High-intensity training certainly burns calories quickly and has its place in a complete fitness program, but it doesn't provide the prolonged fat-oxidizing environment that Zone 2 creates. Think of Zone 2 as a calm, consistent message repeated day after day until your metabolism has no choice but to adapt. Your mitochondria thrive on this kind of repetition. Each Zone 2 session tells your cells this is the fuel source you need to get better at using. Over time, your body becomes progressively more efficient at oxidizing fat around the clock, not just during exercise sessions. That underlying shift is one of the primary reasons low-intensity training is so strongly linked with long-term reductions in visceral fat that actually stay off.
Another reason consistency wins over intensity is hormonal stability. Zone 2 keeps cortisol, your primary stress hormone, relatively low compared to intense workouts that spike it significantly. Lower chronic cortisol means fewer signals telling your body to defensively hold on to deep abdominal fat for protection against perceived threats. When people finally understand that consistency literally rewires metabolism at the cellular level, the whole process becomes less about daily willpower and more about establishing an automatic habit. Visceral fat and insulin resistance feed into each other in a vicious cycle that many people don't realize they're trapped in. The more insulin-resistant your cells become, the more aggressively your body stores incoming energy as fat in the abdominal cavity. But here's genuinely good news backed by substantial research. Zone 2 walking disrupts this destructive loop in multiple powerful ways simultaneously. First, this specific intensity improves insulin sensitivity by increasing your muscle cells' ability to pull glucose from the bloodstream without requiring much insulin to force the process. This alone dramatically reduces the hormonal push toward fat storage. Over weeks of consistent Zone 2 training, glucose uptake becomes noticeably more efficient, which you might notice as more stable energy levels and fewer cravings. Zone 2 also increases the total number and quality of mitochondria inside muscle cells, which directly enhances metabolic flexibility. A body that can easily switch to fat burning as needed doesn't desperately store excess energy around the organs. This is why study after study consistently finds meaningful reductions in visceral fat in people who add moderate intensity walking to their weekly routine, even without changing their diet. And when insulin resistance improves, visceral fat becomes significantly easier to mobilize and burn. It's not magic or a miracle, it's simply physiology lining up at the right angle to finally work in your favor instead of against you. If there's one small practical adjustment that provides a measurable boost to fat oxidation, it's walking before meals or when your glycogen levels are slightly lower. When your carbohydrate stores are somewhat depleted, your body naturally and automatically shifts toward fat oxidation, creating a perfect metabolic match for the slow, steady energy demand of Zone 2 walking. This doesn't mean extreme fasting is required or beneficial. Even just a few hours without eating, such as first thing in the morning before breakfast, can meaningfully change the metabolic environment. Research specifically examining this timing shows that low-intensity exercise performed in a post-absorptive state significantly increases fat oxidation compared to the identical workout done immediately after a meal when insulin and glucose are elevated. Another powerful adjustment is maintaining absolutely consistent pacing throughout your walk. Even small fluctuations, slowing down to check notifications or speeding up unintentionally when your mind wanders, reduce the cumulative time you spend in true Zone 2. A stable, unwavering rhythm equals stable fat oxidation. This is one of those tweaks that feels almost too simple to matter, but it consistently accelerates results for people who've been frustratingly stuck at a plateau. Scientists have spent years trying to pinpoint the sweet spot where Zone 2 walking produces the biggest measurable improvements in metabolic health markers. While there's no single perfect number for every individual, studies examining various populations often land in a remarkably similar range, around 150 to 210 minutes per week. This appears to be the threshold point where fatty acid oxidation capacity, insulin sensitivity, and mitochondrial efficiency begin improving in scientifically measurable ways. One of the key research findings is that weekly total volume matters significantly more than how you structure individual sessions. You can accomplish this with 5 sessions of 30 minutes, 3 sessions of 50 minutes, or even 7 shorter daily walks. Your body responds to the cumulative metabolic effect and repeated exposure to the stimulus. For people who struggle with finding time, even spreading sessions across shorter daily walks of 15 or 20 minutes still activates the same fundamental metabolic pathways, though it may take slightly longer to see equivalent results compared to longer sessions. Higher volumes, such as 300 minutes per week, offer even greater benefits for visceral fat specifically. Research examining people with metabolic syndrome shows that longer weekly exposure to low-intensity aerobic exercise leads to sharper, more dramatic reductions in abdominal fat than shorter durations produce. The takeaway is elegantly simple. The more of your week you spend gently nudging your mitochondria to adapt, the faster your visceral fat responds. It's not speed or intensity that matters most, it's consistent presence and repetition. One of the very first signs that Zone 2 is working isn't actually visible in the mirror, it's energy stability throughout your entire day. When your body becomes genuinely better at burning fat for fuel, the dramatic dips and crashes between meals become noticeably less severe, and this improvement often arrives weeks before any measurable change appears on your waistline, and it's a highly reliable indicator that deep metabolic shifts are taking place beneath the surface. Another early signal is improved breathing control during your walks. After just a few weeks of consistent Zone 2 training, the same exact pace that once felt slightly effortful becomes noticeably smoother and easier. This reflects mitochondrial adaptation happening in real time. Your muscles are literally handling fuel more efficiently with each passing week. Some people also notice subtle warmth in the abdominal area during or shortly after walks. While it's a subtle sensation, this often coincides with increased blood flow to the area and improved mobilization of fatty acids from visceral stores. It's not a fat-melting feeling like some products promise, it's simply your physiology doing its job effectively in the background. And of course, the later signs eventually become visible and measurable. Small but steady reductions in waist circumference, less bloating around the midsection, clothes fitting more comfortably around the belly. These aren't dramatic overnight transformations, but they're steady, trustworthy changes that tend to stay once you've earned them. Every metabolic improvement eventually reaches a point where progress naturally slows or appears to stop. This doesn't mean failure or that your body stopped responding. It simply means your system has adapted to the current stimulus and needs a small strategic adjustment to continue progressing. For many people, adding just one extra Zone 2 session per week is enough to restart visceral fat mobilization and push through the plateau. Another highly effective strategy is mixing one session of brief, controlled, higher intensity intervals into your weekly routine. This doesn't replace your Zone 2 work, it complements it. These short bursts of harder effort increase mitochondrial enzyme concentrations and improve overall cardiovascular capacity, which helps your body return to efficient fat oxidation more quickly during your regular Zone 2 walks. Sleep quality also plays a surprisingly significant role in breaking through plateaus. Poor sleep consistently increases cortisol levels and reduces metabolic flexibility, making visceral fat noticeably more resistant to mobilization. Improving sleep quality and duration often restarts fat loss without needing to alter the exercise program at all. If you ever feel stuck or frustrated with your progress, don't automatically assume the exercise stopped working. Usually only a tiny tweak or adjustment is needed, not a complete overhaul of your entire approach. Zone 2 walking becomes truly effortless and sustainable when it stops feeling like a workout you force yourself to do and starts becoming a natural part of your daily rhythm. Many people succeed long-term by pairing their walks with something genuinely enjoyable, a favorite podcast, an engaging playlist, or a phone call with a friend or family member. Once your brain begins associating the activity with pleasure and enjoyment rather than obligation, the mental resistance completely fades away. Another highly effective habit-forming trick is scheduling your walks at the exact same time every single day. The human body and mind love predictable routine, and your energy patterns adapt more quickly when your walks happen on consistent, predictable rhythms. Over time, missing a scheduled walk actually feels stranger and more uncomfortable than doing one. You can also anchor the walking habit to something you already do automatically, like walking immediately after waking up, right after lunch, or during sunset each evening. Anchoring reduces the mental effort required to make a decision, turning Zone 2 into a default behavior rather than a conscious choice you debate internally. By the time Zone 2 becomes truly automatic, requiring no willpower or internal negotiation, you're not just burning visceral fat, you're maintaining the kind of deep metabolic health that prevents it from creeping back over months and years. And that's the real victory worth celebrating. Turning Zone 2 walking into an automatic daily habit doesn't just shrink visceral fat in the short term, it protects your long-term metabolic health in a way that compounds powerfully over years, not just weeks. And the moment this routine stops